The message came through on all frequencies at 0300 hours. 100,000 swarm warriors were pouring through Thermopylae Station's wormhole gate. The evacuation fleet needed 7 days to move 2 million civilians to safety. 7 days. The station's garrison commander looked at his available forces. 300 Marines, limited ammunition, one corridor wide enough for maybe 20 soldiers to stand shoulder to shoulder. He sent one message back to Fleet Command. 3 words. "We've got this." His name was Commander Leonidas Petros. His Marines called him Leo. The swarm called him nothing because the swarm didn't give names to things they expected to kill in an hour. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about a lot of things. This is the story of the 7 days that the galaxy stopped and watched 300 humans do the impossible. This is the Siege of Thermopylae Station. Thermopylae Station orbited the gas giant Kronos 7 at the edge of explored human space. It had one purpose: controlling access through the only stable wormhole connecting the outer colonies to the inner systems. The wormhole was 12 kilometers wide. A river of commerce, migration, and military traffic flowed through it every day, until the swarm found it. The swarm collective had been expanding for decades, not conquering, not negotiating, not trading, just consuming. Every world they reached was stripped of resources. Every species they encountered was either absorbed or eliminated. They didn't hate humans. They didn't even particularly notice humans. They were hungry, and human space was food. What made the swarm terrifying wasn't intelligence. Individual swarm warriors were not strategic thinkers. What made them terrifying was numbers. They operated as a collective, responding to central direction, sacrificing units without hesitation. They had numbers the way a flood has water, unstoppable through sheer mass. Thermopylae Station had one critical architectural feature that Commander Petros had studied the moment he received the invasion warning. The wormhole gate fed into a single processing corridor, 200 meters long, 20 meters wide. The station's designers had built it as a cargo bottleneck for customs and inspection. Petros looked at that corridor and saw something else. He saw Thermopylae Pass. He saw the hot gates. He saw 300 Spartans and 1,000,000 Persians. They studied this 3,000 years ago, Petros told his Marines. A narrow pass where numbers become meaningless, where 20 soldiers can hold against 10,000 because only 20 can fight at once. He looked at his 300 Marines. "We have better armor than the Spartans did, better weapons, and we have something they didn't have. We know how their story ended, and we know what it meant." "Molon Labe," he said, the ancient Greek words. "Come and take them. They want this corridor, they can come and take it, one at a time." Day 1, 0300 hours. Swarm forces, 100,000. Marine forces, 300. 0300 hours. Contact the wormhole activated at exactly 0300. The first swarm warrior came through at 0301. It was 6 feet tall, armored in natural chitin the color of oil, 6 limbs designed for both locomotion and combat, mandibles that could cut through standard bulkhead plating. Sergeant Yuki Tanaka, stationed at the corridor's front position, watched it through her scope. "Ugly," she said. "Focus," said Petros. "Focused," said Tanaka. "Still ugly." The second swarm warrior came through, then the third. Then they stopped counting individuals and started watching the mass. By 0315, 10,000 swarm warriors were on the station side of the wormhole. By 0330, 30,000. They moved toward the corridor entrance with the absolute confidence of a species that had never encountered meaningful resistance. 0400 hours. First contact, Petros had arranged his Marines in 3 rotating lines. 100 in the front line, 100 resting, 100 on support duty, ammunition, medical, engineering. The corridor's walls, floor, and ceiling were now covered in everything the Marines had stripped from the station in 48 hours of preparation. Stripped electrical conduits that could be activated remotely. Structural supports modified to create controllable collapse points. Every light in the corridor under Marine control, ventilation systems redirected. "Here they come," Petros said. The first wave of swarm warriors entered the corridor at a run, mandibles clicking, A wall of chitin and aggression 100 warriors wide. Except the corridor was only 20 warriors wide, so they piled up. In the open, 10,000 swarm warriors would overwhelm 300 Marines in minutes. In 20 meters of corridor width, it was 20 swarm versus 20 Marines. And Marines had been training for exactly this. The first engagement lasted 8 minutes. The swarm sent wave after wave. The Marines held the line, rotated wounded back, fresh fighters forward, used the corridor walls as cover. When the swarm finally pulled back to assess, the corridor floor was impassable. The Marines had not moved 1 meter. Day 1, morning. Petros reported to Fleet Command. Swarm contact established. Position holding. Request update on evacuation timeline. 72 hours for first civilian transports to clear the inner systems, came the reply. Best total timeline 7 days. 7 days, 300 Marines. 1 corridor. Copy that, said Petros. We'll be here. Day 1, strategic assessment. The swarm collective mind processed the corridor failure with the cold efficiency of a distributed intelligence. In conventional operations, it simply sent more units. But the corridor meant more units didn't help. It tried the ceiling. Marines had welded metal across the upper sections. It tried cutting through the walls. The walls were load-bearing and collapsing them would destroy the station's gravity systems, which the swarm needed to function. It tried sending its smallest warriors. Petros had anticipated this. Tighter metal mesh at ankle height. By the end of day 1, the swarm had lost over 2,000 warriors. The Marines had lost 11. 11 was devastating. But 2,000 was something the swarm could replace 10 times over. Good first day, Petros told his people. We fight smart. Every one of us is worth 100 of them in this space. Remember that. What about the other 800? Asked a Marine. We'll get to them, said Petros. Day 2. Swarm forces, 997,000. Marine forces, 289. The swarm changes tactics. Day 2 began with silence. Complete total silence from the wormhole end of the corridor. They stopped, Tanaka reported. They're thinking, said Petros. A collective intelligence just had a new experience. They never had a choke point before. They're recalculating. The Marines used the break well, welded additional barriers, redistributed ammunition, treated wounds properly, ate real food instead of combat rations. Petros walked the corridor personally, checking every position, talking to every Marine by name. He knew all 300 names. He had memorized them before they deployed. He had studied their service records. He knew who had children, who had just gotten married, who was fighting for college money, who had joined because their parent had served. He knew Private First Class Chen had a daughter who was 4 years old. He knew Sergeant Okafor had proposed to his partner via message 3 days before the invasion warning arrived. He knew Corporal Martinez had been accepted to officer candidate school. Her orders were supposed to come through next week. He knew these things because he had decided, the moment he accepted this assignment, that every one of these Marines would be remembered. By name, individually, not as 300, as 300 individuals. On the wall behind the main position, he had written all 300 names. In case we can't tell them ourselves, he told his XO, someone else will. Day 3. Swarm forces, 993,000. Marine forces, 281. Ammunition crisis begins. By day 3, the ammunition situation was becoming critical. They had started with enough for 2 days of sustained combat. Day 3's rationing began. Petros called it adaptive resource management. His Marines called it making every shot count or they would die. Same thing. What changed was the engagement style. Instead of suppressing fire, the Marines switched to precision targeting. Every shot needed a confirmed target. Spray and pray was finished. What the Marines had instead was something the swarm couldn't match. Trained marksmanship. Petros controlled the corridor lighting. The swarm's vision ranged into infrared and ultraviolet, so darkness alone didn't help, but strobing light did. The corridor lights began cycling at precisely calculated intervals, periods of darkness calibrated to disrupt the swarm's collective target acquisition, while Marines wearing strobing-compensated visors fired during the predictable confusion windows. Day 3 was the bloodiest day for the swarm. Their attempts to adapt to the strobing created coordination failures that cost them heavily. Marine casualties, 12, total remaining 269, but ammunition stores were now at 40% of starting inventory. At current rate, Petros's XO reported, we run dry on day 5. Then we find other ways to fight on day 6 and 7, said Petros. Stop right here. Because what happened on day 4 is the moment this story stopped being a military record and became something the entire galaxy talked about for generations. Fleet Command had been receiving Petros's daily reports, each one professionally formatted, tactically precise, completely calm. Day 1, position holding, 11 casualties. Day 2, position holding, 8 casualties. Day 3, position holding, 12 casualties. But somehow the reports had leaked. Not officially, not through proper channels. Through the Galactic Information Network, the galaxy-wide communication web that connected hundreds of species. The news of Thermopylae Station had spread. 14 species were now watching, not because they were allies of humanity, not because they had treaties with Earth, because word had spread of something that had never happened before in the recorded history of the Swarm Collective's expansion. In 200 years of expansion, the Swarm had never been held. Not for a day, not for an hour. Average time from Swarm first contact to planetary subjugation, 72 hours. Average time from first contact to station capture, 4 hours. Thermopylae Station, 3 days and counting. The Veth Confederation sent an urgent communication to their military council. Humans are holding a wormhole gate against full Swarm collective assault. Day 3, 269 survivors of 300, request analysis. Their military's response? Impossible. Recommend verification of data. Then Day 4's report came through, and the galaxy leaned in. Day 4, Swarm forces, 187,000, Marine forces, 269. Psychological warfare. Day 4, Petros called a different kind of staff meeting. Not tactical, psychological. The Swarm Collective has never failed to take an objective, he said. Every calculation they make is based on that history. They can adapt tactics, but they can't adapt their fundamental assumption that overwhelming numbers eventually win. Look at their pattern. Day 1, mass charge. Day 2, coordinated living wall. Day 3, multiple approach variations. They're cycling through solutions faster than normal. They're not panicking, they can't panic. But they're encountering something outside their experience base. We're going to make it worse. We're going to make them doubt. What followed was something no military academy had ever specifically taught because no military academy had ever needed to teach it. How to psychologically unsettle a hive mind. The station's communication system could broadcast throughout all sections. The Swarm warriors communicated through a combination of chemical signals and high-frequency sound. Marines couldn't replicate the chemical signals, but they could study the sounds. In 72 hours, Private First Class Amara Diallo had analyzed every sound recording of Swarm communication available in human military databases. She had found something specific, the frequency pattern the Swarm used to signal retreat. I can't make it perfect, she said, but close enough. Close enough is perfect enough, said Petros. At 0800 on day 4, when the Swarm advance began its daily push, the station speakers broadcast a continuous loop of approximate retreat signals from behind the Swarm formation. The effect was immediate and fascinating. The Swarm warriors in the corridor kept advancing. Their forward directive was strong, but the warriors behind them near the wormhole began a partial disengagement, responding to the signal. The coordinated collective mind experienced something it processed extremely poorly. Contradictory directives. For 11 minutes, Thermopylae Station's corridor witnessed the galaxy's first recorded case of a Swarm unit experiencing what could only be described as confusion. Petros used those 11 minutes, not to advance. He had no intention of leaving his choke point, but to place charges at 3 pre-selected corridor positions while the Swarm was distracted. When the Swarm recalibrated and resumed its advance an hour later, they moved over 3 buried charges without knowing it. Petros let them get halfway down the corridor before he detonated the first one. Not destroying, fragmenting, breaking formation, creating confusion. Then the second. Then the third. Then the Marines' lines opened fire on a fragmented, uncoordinated enemy in a narrow corridor. Day 4 ended with the Swarm losing 4,000 warriors. Marine casualties, 9. Total remaining, 260. The Veth Confederation's Military Council read the Day 4 report 3 times, then sent a message to their ambassador on Earth. Request meeting with human military commanders at earliest opportunity. Subject, Alliance discussion. Day 5. Swarm forces, 80,000. Marine forces, 260. Running low. Day 5. Ammunition at 20%. Petros called it the day they stopped being a gun line and became engineers. Everything that could be converted into a weapon was converted. Station maintenance equipment, cargo handling machinery, atmospheric processors, industrial tools. Corporal Vasquez built a compressed atmosphere cannon from cargo loading equipment. It couldn't kill swarm warriors, but it could hurl them backward with enough force to break formation. Sergeant Okafor, whose marriage proposal was still waiting for a response in his message queue, rigged the corridor's fire suppression system with a chemical mix that, when combined with the station's atmosphere, created a dense fog bank that disrupted swarm chemical communication. It couldn't stop them, but communication-disrupted swarm warriors were 40% less effective. 40% matters when you're conserving every round. Private First Class Chen, whose 4-year-old daughter was by now presumably on an evacuation transport somewhere in the inner systems, had been working on something that nobody had assigned her. She had been building armor, not for shooting, for when the shooting stopped. She didn't tell Petros. She didn't need to. He saw it and said nothing because the same thought had been in his own mind for 2 days. Day 5 ammunition expenditure, 60% of remaining stocks. End of Day 5 stocks, 8% of original. Day 6 would be fought with almost nothing left to shoot. Marine casualties, Day 5, 14. Total remaining, 246. Visual, 54 names crossed off the wall, written larger separately. Petros crossed out 14 more names, added them to the separate section. He was running out of wall. Day 5, evacuation update, visual, evacuation. Fleet Command communication. Fleet Command reported at 2200 hours. Thermopylae Station, this is Fleet Command. 1,400,000 civilians are through the wormhole. 600,000 remain. Estimated clearance time, 48 hours. Visual, Petros closing his eyes briefly. 2 more days. He had 246 Marines. He had 8% ammunition. He had a corridor. He had a wall with 54 names written large on it. Copy that, Fleet Command, Petros said. We'll hold the door. He turned to his Marines. They were looking at him, all 246 of them, tired, hurt, some bandaged, all present. 2 more days, he said. We've already done something nobody else has ever done. We've held the swarm for 5 days. 5 days nobody in this galaxy thought was possible. I'm not going to lie to you. Day 6 and 7 are going to be different. We're almost out of ammunition. We're going to fight with everything we have left. With the station itself. With our hands if we have to. I need to know who's with me. Visual. Every single Marine raising their hand or weapon, or nodding. Not one of them hesitated. Not one. The day the galaxy held its breath, by Day 6, the Galactic Information Network estimated 47 different species were following the Siege of Thermopylae Station. Not all of them were human allies. Several had no formal relationship with humanity at all. Some had previously been considering allying with the swarm simply because the swarm seemed unstoppable. Past tense. A Veth military analyst broadcasting to 200 million viewers said, "By any military calculation, these humans should have died on Day 1. By Day 3, every model we have predicted total station loss. We are on Day 6. Our models are wrong. Something is happening here that our models cannot account for." A species called the Mira, who communicated through bioluminescent patterns, had a phrase that translated roughly as, "the ones the math forgot." They began using it specifically about human Marines. Day 6. Close quarters. Ammunition. Effectively 0. Petros had saved exactly 300 rounds, 1 per Marine, for use only as a last resort. Chen's armor was on every Marine now. Station plating welded to undersuits. Not elegant. Effective enough. The weapons were whatever the station had left. Maintenance tools. Cargo handles. structural beams cut to length, improvised electroshock devices from station electrical systems. When the swarm advance came on day 6, it met something it had never encountered in 2 centuries of conquest. Humans who had run out of ammunition and responded by picking up metal bars and deciding that was fine. What followed was brutal in a way that tactical reports struggled to capture. The corridor turned into a grinding, visceral, yard-by-yard contest where Marine training and improvised equipment faced swarm numbers and natural weapons. The swarm had mandibles that could cut metal. The Marines had armor that could resist them long enough to matter. The swarm had 6 limbs optimized for combat. The Marines had 10,000 years of hand-to-hand combat training in their institutional memory. Sergeant Tanaka held the left wall position for 6 hours with a welded steel beam and 3 Marines who rotated in when she needed 30 seconds to breathe. Corporal Vasquez used his compressed atmosphere cannon until it broke and then used the broken cannon as a bludgeon. Private First Class Diallo, who had studied swarm communication patterns, discovered that a specific frequency of vibration produced by impact on the corridor walls caused swarm warriors to briefly stop. She spent day 6 hitting the wall in that frequency pattern while others fought. Private First Class Chen fought with armor she had built herself, a maintenance torch she had converted to a close-range heat weapon, and the absolute knowledge that her daughter was on an evacuation transport, and she needed to stay alive long enough for that transport to clear the wormhole. Day 6 casualties 22, total remaining 224, corridor position unmoved. The final day. At 100 hours on day 7, Fleet Command sent a message. Thermopylae Station, this is Fleet Command. Evacuation complete. All 2 million civilians are through the wormhole. Extraction fleet is in position for your retrieval. You are authorized to withdraw. How copy? Petros read it 3 times. 2 million people. Safe. He stood up from his command position and walked to the wall. All 300 names were there. 76 in the large section, 2 and 24 in the original section. He pressed his hand against the large section. 76 names. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned to his XO. Tell Fleet Command we'll be ready for extraction in 1 hour. He walked back to his Marines and said 2 words. We're done. What happened next was not captured in any tactical report. 24 Marines sat down where they stood and cried. 40 more stayed on their feet but reached for each other, hands on shoulders, heads down. The rest stood in the particular kind of silence that comes after 7 days of surviving something that wasn't supposed to be survivable. The withdrawal was professional, military precise. Petros insisted. We walk out of here the same way we walked in, he said, on our feet, in formation. The swarm, still present at the wormhole end of the corridor, did not advance as the Marines withdrew. Nobody could fully explain why. The best hypothesis was that the swarm collective, processing the encounter's data, had issued a temporary observation protocol. Something unprecedented had occurred. The collective needed to process it before resuming. Some human observers who were less scientific about it said something different. They said the swarm watched the Marines leave because even a hive mind knows when it's in the presence of something it doesn't have a category for. The last person out of the corridor was Petros. He stopped at the threshold, turned and looked at the wall. 300 names. 224 people who would carry those names for the rest of their lives. 76 people who would be carried by those 224 forever. He saluted the wall, then he walked out. The galaxy's response. The 47 species watching Thermopylae Station's siege saw the extraction fleet arrive. Saw the Marines board. Saw the station behind them still structurally intact. Still blocking the wormhole. Position never taken. The Veth Confederation made their alliance offer to humanity within 24 hours of the extraction. Their message included one line that became famous. We would rather have humans beside us than facing us. 11 other species sent formal alliance requests within a week. The Mira, who communicated in bioluminescent patterns, sent a light message to Earth that translated as, "We did not know what you were. Now we know. We wish to stand with the ones the math forgot." And the Swarm Collective processed the Thermopylae Station data for 14 days before resuming expansion operations. When they resumed, they changed direction, away from human space. The galactic analysts were divided on why. Some said the corridor had simply been too costly and the swarm had found easier targets. Sergeant Yuki Tanaka, interviewed 6 months after the siege, gave a different answer. The swarm is a collective intelligence. Pure calculation. Zero sentiment. They hit us for 7 days and they lost over 15,000 warriors for 0 corridor gained. Their calculation said cost too high for projected benefit. Move to different target. She paused. Which is funny, because the calculation that told them to leave was the same kind of calculation that said we should have died on day 1. She almost smiled. Math is great, but it doesn't account for Marines who decide the math is wrong. The memorial 6 months after the siege, humanity built a memorial at Thermopylae Station. Not at the wormhole gate, not in a fleet headquarters. In the corridor. The corridor was sealed and preserved exactly as the Marines had left it. Every improvised barrier, every piece of Chen's armor, ends. Every welded support, and on the wall, all 300 names, exactly as Petros had written them. Above the names, one inscription. They were asked how many were enough. They said 300. They were right. Petros visited the memorial on the 6-month anniversary with his 223 surviving Marines. Chen brought her daughter, 4 years old enough to understand that her mother had done something important. The little girl looked at the wall of names and asked her mother, "Why are some names bigger?" Chen thought about it. "Because they needed more space," she said. "Because they were big people." The little girl nodded like that made complete sense. Maybe it did. 7 days, 300 Marines, 1 corridor 20 meters wide, 100,000 swarm warriors. By the end of the siege, swarm casualties, over 15,000. Marine casualties, 76. Corridor taken, 0 meters. Civilians evacuated, 2 million. Those 7 days changed the shape of galactic politics permanently. 11 species signed alliance treaties with humanity within a year. The swarm altered their expansion vector permanently away from human space. And the concept of a choke point defense, which humans had been practicing since a narrow mountain pass in ancient Greece in 480 BCE, became the most studied tactical doctrine in 17 different galactic military academies. Not because humans invented it, we didn't. The Spartans did, 3,000 years before, but because we remembered it, kept it, studied it, and when we needed it, we had it ready. That is something the galaxy is still learning about humanity. We remember. Every battle, every lesson, every name. 3,000 years separated Leonidas of Sparta from Leonidas Petros of the Marine Corps. But the same idea connected them. A narrow place. Overwhelming odds. No retreat. And the understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is hold a door long enough for others to get through it. 2 million people were safe in the inner systems because 300 Marines understood something that ancient Spartans understood. That numbers are not everything. That the ground you choose matters. That courage multiplied by geography can defy mathematics. And that 76 people who don't make it home deserve to have their names written large. Because they needed more space. Because they were big people. Molon Labe. Come and take them. 3,000 years. Still true. In memory of every soldier who ever held a door so others could walk through it. Which day of the siege would have been the hardest for you? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for weekly HFY stories. Next episode, the Marine who held Devil's Canyon alone. 1 soldier, 16 hours, 3,000 lives saved.